About an hour before midnight on Mother's Day in 1986, a group of teenagers assembled at an Episcopal high school in Portland, Oregon, to embark on an expedition. Their goal was to summit Mount Hood, completing an adventure program that was required for all sophomores. What followed was a story of tragedy and loss that is commemorated annually at the institution it changed forever. Early on the morning of May 12, 1986, a party of 20 left the base of Mount Hood for a summit attempt. The group was led by Thomas Goman. He was assisted by Ralph Summers, who had been hired as a technical assistant instructor by Goman. 12 sophomore students formed the nucleus of the group. In addition to the leaders, they were joined by one parent, a faculty member, 3 upper-class students, and D. Zudniak, an instructor. The weather 2 days prior to the climb had been unsettled, and there had been new snowfall. Rain and more snow were predicted. The leaders were aware that a storm was a strong possibility. Most climbers follow a route up the south side, departing from the parking lot at Timberline Lodge, a WPA-built structure that was used to depict the haunted mountain hotel in The Shining. The first section of the 5,200-foot ascent skirts the eastern edge of the Timberline ski area. A well-known lift, the Palmer Chair, parallels the climb's path all the way up to 8,500 feet, where the route continues on the top, taking climbers past well-known features like Crater Rock, the Hogsback, a huge mound of ice and snow at 10,500 feet, and 2 rock towers near the summit called the Pearly Gates. The apparent simplicity of this line, coupled with the mountain's majestic beauty, has made Mount Hood both alluring and dangerous. In the past century, more than 120 people have died on it, a total in the fatality range of North American peaks like Denali and Mount Washington. There are several clear risks: avalanches, falls, crevasses, weather that can turn nasty in minutes. Because of the dangers, it's important to have a good leader on every expedition. Someone who can make the pragmatic decision to change plans when necessary. The group left the Timberline Lodge at about 2:30 a.m., with students leading and breaking trail through calf-deep snow. Within 45 minutes, one student and her mother turned back. The rest continued on, reaching the Silcox Hut at 5 a.m., an hour behind schedule. Here, 2 more students turned back, and soon thereafter, another student was escorted down by one of the upper-class students. After a rest at the top of the Palmer lift at 8 a.m., during which time more students discussed returning, the group pressed on in windy, cold, but seemingly stable weather. Shortly after leaving the Hogsback, Zudniak turned back due to a reoccurrence of snow blindness. The weather has changed, and various members were experiencing difficulty. Goman and Summers discussed turning back. Finally, at roughly 2 p.m., with everyone above 11,000 feet, and winds blowing hard, Summers was able to convince Goman to change his mind. Summers had gone ahead alone 30 or 40 feet and seen that the conditions were simply too precarious. But by then it was too late. The storm howling in from the Pacific had arrived. Difficulties began immediately on the descent. In whiteout conditions, many were in need of help. The first complicating factor emerged when 15-year-old Patrick McGinnis, the youngest climber, started struggling in the cold. He staggered and toppled over, wanting only to go to sleep. At this point, the group had descended several hundred feet and were clustered just below the Hogsback. On a clear day, the climbers would have been easily seen from the Timberline Lodge, black dots on Hood's bright surface. But visibility was now between 20 and 30 feet. Conditions were extreme after this, with the wind estimated at 40 knots and visibility down to 3 meters or less. Conditions like this can induce vertigo. It's impossible to differentiate ground from sky, and when you take a step, you don't know where your foot will land. The trail was lost because of this, and some confusion regarding the compass setting. It's also possible that Goman was having cognitive problems by this point. Whatever the reason, the climbers were moving almost directly sideways across the face of the mountain instead of down. Faculty member Marion Horwell and Goman were exhibiting signs of hypothermia. Summers halted the group in a steep and crevassed area and began digging a snow cave with his shovel, the only one they had. The cave was about the size of a 6-person dome tent when completed. There was not enough room for everyone inside at the same time. Throughout the night, attempts were made to widen the cave opening, and on a rotating basis, people would go outside for air. There was no equipment brought inside the cave, and during the night, the shovel was lost. By morning, the sun had abated, and 2 hours after daylight, Summers decided to descend for help, convinced that we had lost the ability to take care of ourselves. Molly Shula volunteered to go with him. Goman was in a declining state of hypothermia by that time. Events for the next 2 days in and out of the cave involved a prolonged and valiant attempt on the part of the students to maintain the structure of the cave. When the rescue teams finally found the group, only Brinton Clark and Giles Thompson were alive. The others, 9 in all, had succumbed to the extreme conditions. The school commissioned an official inquiry, convening a panel of climbing and hypothermia experts. The report, which was published in July of 1986 in the Oregonian, assigned blame primarily to Goman, who failed to turn back in bad weather, striving beyond the point of common sense to get the students to the top. Parents reacted with a mix of anger, criticism, and understanding. Families of the 7 students who died were offered settlements by the school's insurer. The McGinnis family took a different path, filing a wrongful death lawsuit in September of 1986. The judge ultimately scheduled the trial's opening statements for late June in 1988, just after graduation. 48 hours before the first court date, the opposing parties were able to negotiate a settlement. One family persisted, however. He called the expedition a death march. He and his wife, Judith, demanded $2.7 million in damages, claiming negligence on the part of the school and guide Ralph Summers. 32 years after the tragedy, we have information that wasn't available back then. The Oregon Episcopal School Mount Hood climb remains to this day the second deadliest alpine accident in North American history, behind a 1981 avalanche on Mount Rainier that killed 11. 7 of the 9 Hood victims were teenagers, students at a well-intentioned school who followed the lead of adults they trusted.